The orbital city of the Intergalactic Council hung in the blackness of space like a jewel. Thousands of lights glimmered across its surface, reflecting on the metal hulls of the ships that endlessly arrived and departed. Delegates from hundreds of species moved through the halls, each one a living testament to their world's culture, technology, and pride. Colors that no human eye could fully describe shimmered on scales, feathers, and skin. Sounds unfamiliar to human ears echoed through the grand chambers, a symphony of alien chatter, laughter, and occasional argument. Yet amid this chaos, humans arrived quietly. Their ship was smaller than most, modest in appearance, without the glimmering display or intimidating size that many alien vessels use to command attention. Inside, a small group of humans stood, observing the council with calm, steady eyes. They did not boast. They did not demand recognition. They simply moved, with purpose. Mara, the young human diplomat leading the delegation, walked slowly through the main chamber. Her eyes were sharp but calm, scanning everything, the way delegates gestured, the subtle shifts of power, and the hidden hierarchies embedded in the council's culture. Her companions followed, silent but attentive. They had been trained to observe before speaking, to understand before acting. In a place like this, where arrogance and tradition ruled, subtlety was more powerful than words. The council members noticed immediately. A few whispered to each other, their words sharp with curiosity and caution. "Humans," one said in a tone that carried disbelief. "I've heard they are primitive, barely capable of surviving on one world, and yet they move as if they own the place." Another delegate, scales shifting in hues of green and gold, hissed softly. "Do you see how they walk? They do not flaunt their technology, they do not compete for attention, yet their eyes, they watch everything. I do not like it." But not all delegates were suspicious, some were amused. "They are harmless," said a rotund, four-armed creature from the planet Trelmar. "Look at them. They do not have the elegance or flair of the Varshalians, nor the intellect of the Koran. What could they possibly contribute?" Mara overheard none of these comments. She did not need to. Her focus was on the structure, the routines, and the hidden weaknesses of the council. Every delegation had a pattern, every species a predictable set of behaviors. And humans, though new to this stage, had an advantage: curiosity tempered by adaptability. By midday, the humans had already mapped the flow of communication, identified the factions most likely to resist change, and noted those who could be allies. They spoke little, but their presence was already causing ripples. Delegates found themselves glancing at them more often than necessary, adjusting behavior subconsciously. A minor incident occurred near the central chamber. A young alien, excited and careless, knocked over a hovering console. In a flurry of panic, several delegates shouted, each blaming the other for negligence. The humans did not intervene. Mara simply stepped forward, her voice calm but carrying a tone that demanded attention without aggression. "Allow me," she said. With a few simple gestures and a careful recalibration of the console, she restored it to working order. Gasps echoed across the room. Aliens who relied on complex, centuries-old technology were astonished to see a human correct what they considered intricate machinery with such ease and simplicity. Yet Mara did not linger for praise. She nodded politely and stepped back, returning to silent observation. Over the next few days, humans did not seek attention. They walked among the council chambers, attended meetings quietly, and asked questions in ways that revealed contradictions or illogical policies. Other species often responded with irritation, seeing the humans as naive. But slowly, the pattern became clear. The humans were not naive. They were patient. They were precise. And above all, they were fearless in the face of arrogance. Mara often met the eyes of council members during these sessions. Her gaze was direct but not hostile, inquisitive but not mocking. Many delegates found themselves caught off guard. They were used to intimidation, negotiation, and manipulation. No species had ever simply observed them, quietly noting flaws without immediate judgment. The silence was unsettling, more powerful than any shout or threat. One afternoon, a counselor from the world of Krathol approached Mara. He was tall, with luminous skin and elongated fingers that dripped with a fluid-like substance, and he radiated authority. "Human," he said, his voice both curious and wary. "What is your purpose here? Surely your species cannot hope to influence the council in any meaningful way." Mara tilted her head slightly, considering him before replying. "We are here to understand, to learn, to participate in ways that benefit more than just ourselves. We do not seek to dominate, we seek to contribute." Her words were simple yet precise. They carried no threat, only clarity. The counselor's eyes narrowed. "And yet I sense something unusual. You watch us, record our decisions, and yet remain silent. How do we know your intentions are pure?" Mara smiled faintly. "Our intentions are not hidden, but perhaps the council has forgotten the value of observation and patience. We are here to remind you." The counselor was unsettled. He had faced countless species that tried to manipulate, bribe, or coerce him, and yet the humans were different. They were calm, unyielding in their honesty, and yet flexible in approach. There was no fear, no prideful display, no hidden agenda, and that, more than anything, left a mark. As the days passed, whispers about humans began circulating. Some delegates speculated about their technology, their intelligence, their culture. Others dismissed them as harmless, yet the sense of unease grew. The human silence spoke louder than any speech. Their presence challenged the very assumptions the council relied upon. In the quiet of the night cycle, Mara recorded her observations in the human ship. Her notes were meticulous, detailing every nuance, the way power shifted in subtle gestures, how species reacted to pressure, where alliances and weaknesses lay. Humans had long relied on adaptability and observation to survive and thrive on their home planet. Here, in the vast complexity of the Intergalactic Council, those same traits allowed them to move like shadows through a garden of giants, unseen, yet profoundly influential. By the end of the first week, a subtle change had taken root. Delegates were more cautious in their arguments. Alliances shifted slightly as factions reconsidered strategies. Some even began to mirror human calmness, consciously or unconsciously, while others grew defensive and erratic. The humans did not cause this directly. They merely existed, quietly observing, listening, and subtly influencing through presence alone. Mara looked down at the bustling city from the observation deck. Ships moved like glowing ants against the backdrop of space. She knew that the real work had only begun. The council was a complex organism, proud and rigid. It would resist change, ignore logic, and cling to tradition. But humans had a strength no species here possessed: resilience, adaptability, and a willingness to act based on reason, not ego. The stage was set. Humans had arrived. The council had noticed. And though no one knew it yet, the galaxy itself was about to feel the impact of their quiet presence. For now, humans strolled through the council chambers in silence, unnoticed by some, underestimated by many, and observed with fascination by a few. Their journey had begun, not with loud proclamations or forceful declarations, but with something far more powerful: the ability to see clearly, understand fully, and act wisely when the time came. The orbital city of the Intergalactic Council thrummed with activity. Lights flickered, ships docked and departed, and the endless murmur of alien voices filled every corridor. For weeks, humans had moved among the delegates quietly, observing, noting patterns, and avoiding direct confrontation. Most council members still underestimated them. Then the crisis began. It started as a subtle fluctuation in the central energy grid. At first, delegates noticed minor delays in transport pods and the flicker of lights in the chambers. Technicians reported anomalies in energy flow, but the council dismissed them as minor glitches. By the end of the first hour, however, the problem had escalated. Panels went dark, vital systems slowed, and a low hum of tension spread across the city. The council's assembly hall erupted into chaos. Delegates shouted over one another, blaming technicians, engineers, or other species for the failure. Some accused entire planetary systems of sabotage, while others argued for extreme measures that risked destabilizing the orbital city further. Mara watched from the side of the chamber. She did not panic. She did not raise her voice. She observed. She had seen this before, uncontrolled panic in the face of technical problems. Humans, trained to act calmly under pressure, had an advantage the council had long forgotten: rational thinking in chaos. Perhaps, Mara said quietly, her voice carrying just enough for nearby delegates to hear, we should approach this systematically. Heads turned. A few delegates frowned. Humans had not yet been fully involved in council discussions. Their input was rarely requested. To some, her words sounded like audacity. To others, they were a lifeline. A tall, crystalline alien with jagged limbs spoke first. Human, you have no authority here. Your species barely understands our technology. Stay silent. Mara nodded politely. I do not seek authority, only to assist. She stepped toward the central console, her movements precise. Unlike the council delegates who gestured wildly, shouted instructions, and argued endlessly, Mara worked with calm efficiency. Her human colleagues spread out, observing systems, consulting manuals, and quietly gathering data. Minutes passed. The council's frustration grew. Delegates bickered, strategies collided, and the energy grid continued to falter. Meanwhile, humans worked steadily. They had no advanced alien technology to override the system. Instead, they relied on reasoning, logic, and cooperation, an approach unfamiliar to the council. One of the council engineers finally spoke. Human, you cannot fix this. The system is too complex beyond your comprehension. Mara turned to him, her voice calm but firm. Perhaps you underestimate the value of observation and careful thought. Complexity is not impossible to understand. It only requires patience. The engineer blinked. He wanted to argue, to dismiss her, but Mara's tone left no room for hostility. It was simple, honest, and direct. Something about it resonated, though he could not name why. Humans began to trace the energy pathways methodically. They identified bottlenecks, overloaded circuits, and conflicting protocols that the council had never noticed. Delegates leaned over their shoulders, curious, despite themselves. They saw humans work without panic, without ego, and without interference from political motivations. By the second hour, the council's panic had grown to desperation. The orbital city, dependent on the central grid, began experiencing wider outages. Communication between ships faltered. Life support systems in some sectors operated at minimal capacity. Delegates shouted even louder, demanding immediate action, blaming species and threatening sanctions. And then Mara spoke again. The problem is not sabotage nor incompetence. It is inefficiency caused by outdated systems and poor coordination. If we redirect energy flow here, she pointed to a secondary conduit, and reset these circuits in a controlled sequence, the grid will stabilize. Silence followed. Some delegates scoffed. Others frowned, uncertain. The risk was high. One mistake could worsen the crisis. Finally, the crystalline alien, still frowning, said, "Do it, human. Show us your plan." Mara nodded to her team, and they moved quickly but carefully. Each adjustment was deliberate. Each calculation was double-checked. The council watched with a mixture of disbelief and growing respect. Minutes later, the hum of the energy grid began to normalize. Lights steadied. Transport pods returned to schedule. Panels displayed green instead of red. The crisis was over. Gasps echoed across the chamber. Delegates could hardly believe it. They had argued, shouted, and threatened. Yet it was a group of humans, quiet, unassuming, methodical, who solved the problem. One elder delegate, a silver-scaled diplomat with a voice like wind chimes, whispered, I cannot believe this. They did not use brute force nor complex machines, just Logic. Even skeptics could not deny the outcome. Mara turned to face the council, her expression calm. The solution was not about superiority or dominance. It was about understanding, cooperation, and reasoning. Panic and arrogance do not fix systems. Careful thought does. Some delegates were visibly shaken. For the first time, they realized humans operated on principles the council had ignored for centuries. Their methods were simple yet effective. Their influence came not from intimidation, wealth, or technology, but from skill, intelligence, and patience. A counselor from the Trelmar delegation approached Mara. "Your species. You act without show, without claim, yet the results are undeniable. How can this be? We are trained for years in council protocols, yet your approach succeeded where ours failed." Mara considered the question. "We observe first. We learn before acting. We cooperate rather than compete. These are traits that serve humans well, and perhaps traits the council has overlooked." The counselor nodded slowly, unsure whether to feel admiration or unease. Mara's words were calm, yet they carried weight. By the end of the day, whispers filled the council halls. Delegates speculated about human capabilities. Some feared them, some admired them, and others dismissed them as lucky. Yet the seed of change had been planted. The council, so accustomed to rigid hierarchy and tradition, realized that humans were different. They were not here to dominate or conquer. They were here to demonstrate that intelligence and cooperation could achieve what arrogance and intimidation could not. Humans did not celebrate. They did not boast. They returned to their quarters, recording observations, noting reactions, and preparing for what would come next. Mara knew this was only the beginning. If the council had underestimated humans before, they would do so again. But the quiet competence displayed today had already left an impression that would last far longer than the crisis itself. That night, Mara looked out at the stars beyond the orbital city. Ships glimmered against the black canvas of space, carrying hundreds of species unaware of the subtle shift that had occurred. The humans had arrived quietly, acted decisively, and left a mark that would grow slowly but surely. She thought of the future. The council, proud and arrogant, would try to maintain control, resist change, and cling to old methods. But humans did not rely on fear or force. They relied on principles the council could not ignore: observation, reason, and cooperation. And soon, the galaxy would understand that humans could influence events not with weapons or fleets, but with clarity, skill, and integrity. For now, though, the council had endured a minor crisis and survived only with human guidance. The delegates were left to ponder one truth they could not escape. Humans had power, but it was subtle, quiet, and unlike anything they had ever faced. Mara returned to her cabin, exhausted but focused. She wrote her observations carefully. Which delegates had reacted with fear, which with admiration, which with disbelief. She noted alliances, rivalries, and weaknesses. Every detail mattered. Humans survived and thrived not because of raw strength, but because they understood systems, people, and strategy. The next challenge would come. The council would not forget this demonstration, nor would they easily forgive it. Humans would face resistance, doubt, and even hostility, but they were ready. The ability to adapt, to remain calm under pressure, and to influence without force had brought them success today. Tomorrow, it might change the fate of the entire galaxy. Weeks had passed since the energy grid crisis. The orbital city of the Intergalactic Council hummed with its usual mixture of activity and tension, yet something had shifted. Humans no longer moved unnoticed. Delegates watched them more closely, sometimes with curiosity, sometimes with unease. The subtle competence the humans had displayed during the crisis had left a mark. Mara and her team continued their quiet work. They attended meetings, observed council debates, and asked questions, but never aggressively. Their questions were simple yet pointed, revealing contradictions in council policies, exposing outdated procedures, and suggesting more practical solutions. During one session, a quarrel erupted between the Grelth and the Vocari delegations. The argument was loud, chaotic, and quickly spiraled toward personal insults. The council chair tried to restore order, but voices rose again, each species trying to dominate the discussion. Mara raised her hand politely. The room grew quiet, not because she commanded it, but because her calm presence created an instinctive pause. "If I may," she said softly, "perhaps the issue is not which faction is correct, but which solution benefits the system as a whole. Could we examine the long-term consequences rather than immediate victory?" Delegates blinked. It was not unusual for a counselor to speak, yet it was unusual for their words to be so simple, so rational, without hidden motives. The argument faltered as murmurs spread. Slowly, the room turned to reason rather than anger, analyzing the situation objectively. Some delegates resisted, trying to belittle the humans, claiming that they could not understand the complexity of alien politics. Yet Mara remained calm, never defensive, never aggressive. She simply presented observations and questions, highlighting inefficiencies and pointing out potential improvements. Outside the main chambers, subtle changes were also taking place. Other species began to imitate humans unconsciously. They slowed their gestures, lowered their voices, and considered arguments more carefully before reacting. Some did so mockingly, thinking it a simple habit. Others did so sincerely, realizing that this calm, methodical approach led to better outcomes. A particularly revealing incident occurred when the Council attempted to standardize trade regulations across several star systems. The existing system favored the wealthiest species, ignoring smaller, resource-poor worlds. The debate lasted for days, with accusations, threats, and proposals failing repeatedly. Humans intervened, not with power, but with logic. Mara presented a simple model, showing that cooperation would lead to greater wealth and stability for all parties. She did not demand compliance. She merely asked the Council to consider the broader benefits. Delegates were skeptical. "Your model is too simple," argued one elder from the Varshilians. "It cannot account for the complexities of our economies and interstellar politics." Mara nodded. "It is simple because the solution should be simple. Complexity does not always equate to correctness. A system that benefits everyone does not need to be convoluted." Slowly, skeptics began to listen. The arguments became less emotional and more rational. After hours of discussion, the Council reluctantly agreed to adopt the human-suggested approach. Trade flows stabilized, smaller systems received better. Resources in the previously dominant factions had to adjust. This success did not go unnoticed. Delegates whispered among themselves. Humans had no armies, no advanced alien technology, and no political alliances, yet they influenced policy in ways no one else could. It was unnerving, yet undeniable. Not everyone was pleased. Some factions grew defensive, feeling exposed by the humans' insights. "They are meddling where they do not belong," one Krathal counselor muttered. "Their questions reveal our failures. We should ignore them." But ignoring the humans was impossible. Their calm, rational presence affected every discussion. Delegates found themselves double-checking their arguments, reconsidering their motives, and often unwillingly adjusting their behavior. Humans did not force change. They inspired it. Mara's team also observed these reactions carefully. They recorded who adapted, who resisted, and which strategies influenced the most delegates. Humans were applying their principle of observation once again, learning the social and political dynamics of the Council without aggression. During a meeting on interstellar security, the Council debated defense protocols against potential invaders. Most species proposed massive fleets and expensive technologies, arguing that a strong show of force would guarantee safety. The room was filled with boasts of military power, each species trying to assert dominance. Mara spoke softly. "Strength alone does not ensure security. Cooperation, shared intelligence, and strategic planning can achieve more, often at lower cost." Laughter erupted from several delegates. Do you really believe a few humans can teach us about defense? One sneered. Mara smiled faintly. Not humans alone, but the principle stands. A system that emphasizes unity and planning often succeeds where sheer force fails. History demonstrates this across many species, including our own. Her words were simple, yet delegates found themselves thinking deeply. The session ended with a decision to integrate cooperation-based strategies alongside traditional defense plans, an unprecedented compromise. Over time, the humans' subtle influence became a constant presence. Delegates could no longer dismiss them as inconsequential. They raised questions that revealed flaws in systems, highlighted inefficiencies, and suggested practical solutions, all without dominating the conversation or asserting authority. Outside formal meetings, Mara and her team also began fostering relationships. They listened more than they spoke, offering advice only when asked. They did not seek to manipulate or impress, yet they earned the respect of those willing to listen. Aliens who once ignored them began consulting humans privately, asking for guidance on matters ranging from logistics to diplomacy. Even minor successes amplified the humans' reputation. A debate over environmental protocols for newly colonized planets had stalled for months. Humans suggested practical methods that minimized harm while maximizing productivity. Their ideas were simple, feasible, and fair. Within hours, the Council approved a pilot program based on human recommendations, a speed and efficiency unheard of in Council history. The shift was noticeable. Factions that had previously competed aggressively now paused to consider human input. Some adapted willingly, others resisted, feeling their authority threatened. Yet no one could deny that humans brought results. Mara herself never sought credit. She recorded observations meticulously, noting reactions, strategies, and alliances. Humans thrived on understanding systems, and this was a system, the Council, that required careful study. One evening, Mara observed a conversation between two elder delegates in the observation lounge. "I cannot stand it," said one. "Their questions expose every flaw in our methods. We are supposed to be leaders, and yet they make us look incompetent without even trying." The other elder nodded slowly. "It is true, and yet I find myself listening. Their simplicity hides strength. Their calmness is unsettling. Perhaps we have underestimated humans for too long." Mara listened quietly from a distance, noting the conversation in her log. Humans did not intervene. Their influence came simply from being observed and understood. The following weeks reinforced the effect. Human interventions, questions, and observations subtly reshaped Council operations. Factions adjusted policies, procedures became more logical, and discussions, while still heated, gradually moved toward productive solutions rather than ego-driven arguments. The Council's bureaucrats were unsettled. For centuries they had relied on rigid hierarchies, intimidation, and elaborate protocols to maintain control. Now, a species they had considered insignificant was changing the very way the Council operated, without force, without show, and without claim to authority. Mara recognized the pattern. Human strength lay not in technology or numbers, but in a combination of observation, reasoning, and ethical behavior. The Council had built walls of tradition and pride, yet humans moved through them quietly, leaving subtle cracks that encouraged reflection, change, and adaptation. By the end of the third month, whispers of humans' influence were everywhere. Some delegates worried about being overshadowed. Others admired them quietly. Even those who resisted began to act differently, consciously or not, adjusting policies and behavior in ways they might have previously ignored. Mara recorded her final observation of the period in her log. Humans do not dominate, they inspire. They do not coerce, they reveal. And in a system as complex and rigid as the Intergalactic Council, that is more powerful than any weapon, fleet, or speech. The galaxy, so far removed from humanity's homeworld, was beginning to feel the effect of a species that acted not with pride but with principle, not with aggression, but with integrity. And though humans had not yet claimed recognition or authority, Their presence alone had reshaped politics in ways the council could not ignore. For Mara, the lesson was clear. Influence did not require loud proclamations. Power did not require dominance. Humans had shown that patience, observation, and ethical action could achieve more than fear, force, or manipulation. And the council, proud, arrogant, and traditional as it was, could not unsee the quiet strength of a species that had arrived without notice and was now quietly changing everything. The stage was set. The orbital city of the Intergalactic Council had become an entirely different place over the past months. The subtle influence of the humans had reshaped discussions, shifted alliances, and encouraged species to reconsider long-held policies. Yet despite their growing reputation, Mara and her team moved quietly, never claiming credit, never seeking attention. The decision to leave came not abruptly, but as a natural conclusion of their mission. The humans had accomplished what they had come to do: demonstrate that intelligence, cooperation, and ethical reasoning could achieve more than power or intimidation. They had left a lasting impression, and it was time to step back and allow the council to process what had occurred. On the morning of departure, the council chambers were unusually still. Delegates whispered nervously to each other, some curious, some anxious. The humans gathered their belongings calmly as if preparing for a simple walk. There were no grand speeches, no ceremonial farewells, only quiet preparation. Mara addressed the council one last time. Her voice was calm, measured, and carried the weight of careful observation. "We have come not to command, nor to dominate, but to participate. Our presence has always been meant to demonstrate one principle: clarity, cooperation, and reason are more powerful than ego, fear, or force. Our work here is done." A murmur ran through the chambers. Some delegates were offended, feeling their authority subtly criticized. Others nodded in agreement, recognizing the truth in her words. Yet no one could deny the human's impact. The crystalline counselor who had first challenged Mara's competence stepped forward. "Your species. You have taught us more in months than we have learned in decades. You leave quietly, yet the echoes of your presence will remain." Mara inclined her head respectfully. "We do not leave to boast. We leave so the council may reflect, adapt, and learn. True change cannot be forced, it must be understood and chosen." Delegates murmured, some nodding thoughtfully, others shifting uneasily. The humans' calm demeanor, their humility, and their quiet confidence had unsettled more than a few powerful factions. They realized that for all the political maneuvering and traditions of the council, humans had done something no one else could. They had influenced the system without asserting dominance. Outside the chambers, humans moved steadily toward their ship. Ships in the docking bay shifted automatically, recognizing the delegation that had arrived so quietly months ago. The council watched, some in awe, some in frustration, as the humans boarded without fanfare. As the ship's ramp closed, Mara looked back at the council one last time. There was no anger, no triumph, no prideful gesture, only a quiet acknowledgement that this experience had been meaningful. The humans were leaving, yet their absence would be more powerful than their presence had ever been. Back in the council halls, the effects of human influence began to surface immediately. Delegates, now forced to confront their own shortcomings, started discussions about reform, cooperation, and efficiency. Some factions resisted, stubbornly clinging to old methods and traditions. Others attempted to imitate human strategies, introducing subtle changes in policy and behavior. It was chaotic at first. The council had relied on predictable routines, authority, and the dominance of certain factions for centuries. The sudden absence of humans left a vacuum, and species scrambled to fill it. Some copied human approaches superficially, resulting in awkward interactions and unintended consequences. Others recognized the deeper lesson: observation, integrity, and ethical action could reshape outcomes more than fear or force. Mara's departure was also a test of patience for the council. The humans had demonstrated capability without control, influence without authority. Now the council would have to decide whether they could continue improving on their own, or revert to old patterns. In the weeks following their departure, subtle yet profound changes began to take hold. Trade policies became more equitable, security, plans integrated cooperation with strategy, and interspecies disputes were resolved with greater rationality rather than force. The council had no choice but to adapt because the humans had left them the tools, and the example, to do so. Some factions struggled with this transformation. They felt exposed, vulnerable, and resentful. These humans, one Krathal counselor, muttered privately to an ally, "They have shown our flaws to everyone. We are no longer seen as infallible." And they leave without a word. Others found inspiration. Delegates who had observed humans closely began forming new alliances, emphasizing cooperation and shared objectives. Slowly, a culture of reason and integrity emerged, seeded by the quiet actions of the humans. Mara and her team observed the council from their ship's command deck, recording changes without interfering. They noted who adapted successfully, who resisted, and which strategies proved most effective. This was, in a way, another lesson for the humans. Even after leaving, the impact of ethical, thoughtful action could ripple outward, creating change, far beyond immediate presence. The ship departed the orbital city quietly, gliding through the black void of space. Lights of the council glimmered below, and Mara reflected on the months spent among alien delegates. Humans had arrived as observers, acted in moments of need, and subtly influenced policy and behavior. They had not conquered, coerced, or dominated, but they had changed the council forever. Mara thought about the future. The galaxy was vast, filled with systems and civilizations unaware of human presence. Yet the principles they had demonstrated, the power of observation, rational action, and cooperation, were universal. Mara knew that the humans' quiet influence would continue, even as their physical presence faded. In her private log, Mara wrote, "True strength does not always roar. Sometimes it walks silently, yet leaves footprints that guide others long after it is gone." Back in the council, the immediate aftermath of their departure became apparent. Delegates argued less impulsively, considered solutions more carefully, and acknowledged the practical advice humans had offered. Some species tried to emulate humans superficially, often failing at first, but slowly learning that the key was integrity, patience, and clarity. Not all reactions were positive. Certain factions, threatened by the loss of their unchallenged authority, attempted to discredit humans, claiming their influence was negligible or accidental. Others saw the humans as a threat that had been removed, and they feared what might come if humans returned. Yet despite these tensions, the seeds of change had been planted. The council, once a rigid and hierarchical system resistant to reason, had begun moving toward a more adaptable and ethical approach, and all of it had been achieved by a species that did not shout, did not dominate, and did not demand attention. Mara's team reflected on their journey. Humans had proven that influence could be subtle, that leadership did not require control, and that ethical action could achieve results more enduring than fear or force. These lessons would guide humans as they traveled to new systems, faced new civilizations, and confronted new challenges. The ship glided silently through the stars, leaving the bright lights of the orbital city behind. For the council, the aftermath was just beginning. They would debate, argue, and struggle to adapt. Some would succeed, others would resist. Yet one thing was certain: the humans' quiet example had left an indelible mark. Mara looked forward, considering the challenges ahead. The galaxy was full of systems in need of guidance, conflicts to resolve, and civilizations to observe. Humans would continue to walk their path, not as conquerors, but as exemplars of reason, cooperation, and resilience. And as the stars stretched endlessly before them, Mara allowed herself a faint smile. Humans had arrived, acted with clarity and principle, and left. The council would endure the aftermath, but the memory of humans, and the lessons they embodied, would linger far longer than anyone could predict. In the council halls below, debates continued. Some delegates, inspired by the humans, tried new approaches, reconsidering policies and promoting cooperation. Others resisted, clinging to old ways, frustrated by the absence of the subtle force that had quietly reshaped their perspectives. The galaxy had been introduced to a different kind of power, one not defined by weapons or fleets but by thought, observation, and integrity. Mara and her team, aboard their ship, moved forward into the unknown, leaving behind a council that would never be the same. Humans had strolled away in silence, but the echoes of their presence would endure, shaping minds, policies, and civilizations for years to come. The departure was quiet, yet the impact was loud, unseen by many, undeniable, to all who had witnessed it. The human ship had long disappeared into the black void of space, leaving the intergalactic council to its own devices. The orbital city remained a gleaming jewel, its corridors still echoing with the chatter of thousands of delegates, yet there was a subtle difference in the air. Something had changed. The council, once rigid, proud, and steeped in centuries of tradition, now felt a quiet tension, a need to adapt to the lessons left behind by a species that had come quietly, acted decisively, and left without claim or applause. Council sessions resumed with the usual debates and arguments, yet the tone was different. Delegates now paused before speaking, considering consequences and questioning assumptions. The energy grid incident, the trade negotiations, and other subtle interventions had been more than events. They were reminders that efficiency, reason, and cooperation could outperform intimidation or dominance. A silver-scaled counselor from the Varshalian stood at a podium during a routine meeting addressing the assembly. Fellow delegates, we have witnessed a species that operates differently than any we have encountered. Their methods are unfamiliar, yet effective. Perhaps it is time we consider not only the strength of our fleets or the grandeur of our technology, but the clarity of thought and ethical action in decision-making. A murmur of agreement spread through some corners of the chamber, while others muttered disapproval. Old habits die slowly, and many delegates struggled with the humility required to acknowledge the influence of humans. In private, factions attempted to analyze what had occurred. They were subtle, whispered a Krathal counselor to an ally. They observed, recorded, and acted only when necessary. And yet, their effect has reshaped alliances, policies, and even our perception of authority. Some factions tried to imitate human behavior superficially, slowing their gestures, tempering their words, or asking questions rather than issuing commands. It did not always work. The subtlety and authenticity of humans could not be copied with mere mimicry. The humans' advantage lay in their principles, integrity, observation, and patience. Meanwhile, other delegates embraced the lessons genuinely. Councils began experimenting with new methods of decision-making, integrating cooperation-based approaches alongside traditional hierarchical structures. Efficiency improved. Conflicts that would have escalated into months of debate were resolved more quickly. Even security strategies now incorporated alliances and shared intelligence, rather than relying solely on overwhelming force. The council chambers themselves began to feel different. The atmosphere was less tense in some ways, yet charged with an undercurrent of self-awareness. Delegates were no longer just performing politics, they were questioning their assumptions, forced to consider perspectives they had previously ignored. All of this stemmed from a species that had walked through their halls without fanfare, without weapons, and without arrogance. In quiet corners of the orbital city, conversations about humans became almost ritualized. "Do you remember the calmness of their presence?" asked one young counselor to a mentor. It was unsettling but also inspiring. They didn't need to shout to be heard. They simply acted, and it changed everything. The mentor nodded slowly. Yes, and that is the lesson. Power is not always measured in fleets or technology. Sometimes it lies in patience, reason, and integrity. The humans have shown us that. Yet not all reactions were positive. Some factions remained bitter, resentful that a species they had considered insignificant had challenged centuries of tradition and forced reflection on their methods. These factions attempted to discredit human influence, labeling it as coincidence, luck, or anomaly. However, as time passed, even they could not ignore the tangible changes: improved policies, smoother negotiations, and a subtle but undeniable shift in council culture. The humans' departure also sparked curiosity across the galaxy. Reports of their influence spread to other systems carried by emissaries, traders, and ships that had interacted with the council. Some species were skeptical, believing the humans' presence exaggerated. Others were intrigued, seeing the potential in a species that could influence outcomes without fleets, weapons, or coercion. Back aboard their ship, Mara and her team observed the ripple effects quietly. They did not interfere, yet they monitored council communications, trade reports, and interstellar developments. Each success, each subtle improvement, confirmed the principle that had guided them from the start. Ethical, intelligent action could create enduring change. Mara recorded her thoughts in her private log. The galaxy is vast, and civilizations are diverse. Many will resist change, cling to old ways, or attempt to assert dominance. Yet the lesson remains simple. Observation, reason, and integrity can influence even the most complex systems. Humanity's role is not to conquer, but to demonstrate the power of clarity and cooperation. Months passed, and the council continued to evolve. Delegates began sharing best practices, learning from mistakes, and approaching conflicts with a more analytical, less emotional mindset. Trade routes became more efficient, environmental policies improved, and security strategies incorporated not just strength, but alliances and intelligence. The humans' subtle influence had begun to reshape not only the council's methods but its culture. Yet the humans' greatest impact was not in the policies themselves, but in the mindset of the delegates. They had witnessed a species that could act decisively, ethically, and intelligently without demanding authority or recognition. This example lingered, prompting self-reflection, humility, and a gradual shift toward principles previously undervalued. Even years later, the memory of humans walking quietly through the halls of the council remained vivid. Scholars wrote about their influence, diplomats referenced their methods, and leaders considered their principles when making decisions. It became a common saying among council delegates: observe as humans do, act as humans do, but remember, their integrity is the true power. Back on Mara's ship, humans continued their journey into the galaxy. They explored new systems, observed new civilizations, and carried with them the lessons learned. Influence does not require dominance. Strength does not always rely on weapons, and leadership is most effective when guided by reason, cooperation, and ethics. Mara reflected on their experiences. Humanity had arrived quietly, acted when necessary, and left a lasting impact without demanding recognition. This, she knew, was the true measure of power: to change minds, systems, and cultures without coercion, to leave a mark that outlives one's presence. As the ship glided through the endless expanse of stars, Mara smiled faintly. The humans had accomplished what they had set out to do. They had shown the galaxy a different kind of strength, a quiet, thoughtful, ethical strength that could influence civilizations more effectively than fear, force, or intimidation ever could. The council below continued to adapt. Some factions flourished under the new methods while others resisted, clinging to old ways. Conflicts arose, compromises were made, and progress continued. But no one could deny the humans' mark on history. Years later, the orbital city still remembered them. Statues were never built. Monuments were never erected. Humans had never sought fame. Yet their example endured in policy, in thought, and in the subtle shift of culture across countless species. The galaxy had learned, without realizing it, that sometimes the quietest footsteps leave the deepest impressions. And so, humanity continued its journey, not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as exemplars of clarity, cooperation, and reason. The council endured the aftermath, forever changed by a species that walked among them in silence, acted with integrity, and departed without claim. The story ended not with a shout, not with a victory parade, but with a quiet truth. Power is most lasting when it is guided by wisdom, patience, and principle. Humanity had shown this truth to the galaxy, and somewhere, in the endless expanse of stars, the humans continued their silent journey, ready to leave their mark wherever reason, cooperation, and integrity were needed next.